night, Daf Kuf Aleph, Sunday's Daf. So on Shabbos' Daf, we introduced the Mishnah, where the Tanna Kama says you don't have an Isser Gid Anasha by a not kosher animal. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says there is an Isser, because the Bnei Yaakov had the Isser, to which the Tanna Kama responds that the Isser only came about at Sinai. Ela shenichtav b'mkaimai. There seems to be a machlekes Rashi and the Rambam in the Pirish Mishnah is how to understand Ela shenichtav b'mkaimai, according to Rashi, that the Isser wasn't there until Matan Torah, and only at Matan Torah, according to Rashi, it was written back b'mkaimai. Whereas the Rambam in the Pirish Mishnah famously says that we're only mechuyev to do things from what was said by Sinai and not what was said earlier. But in Achanami, it was usher for the Bnei Yaakov even before Matan Torah. It's just not the reason that we don't eat the Gid Anasha. But either way, this idea that Gid Anasha would be chal on a behemoth that's not kosher gets into the sugi of Isser chal al Isser, because Rabbi Yehuda does seem to be acknowledging you can have the Isser Gid Anasha on top of the Isser of the not kosher animal, which is problematic since Rabbi Yehuda seems to hold ein Isser chal al Isser by the case of the Oif Tameh, which is an Avela, and this is all assuming that the Gid Anasha is considered meat because it's Naisein Tam, because if it's not Naisein Tam, then it wouldn't be meat in the first place to have any kind of Isser Nevela. So the last thing we did yesterday was the Gemara's suggestion that a Gid Anasha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is Naisein Tam. It is considered Basar, but it comes about at the same time as the Isser Nevela because it's Naig B'Shlil. Even as an Uber, as an unborn fetus of an animal, it's already Asr, which means that the Gid Anasha Isser begins as the animal is a fetus. So it's really essentially the same time from its creation. There'll be both the Isurim of Gid Anasha and Behemoth Tamea. Umemel, it's not ein Isser chal Isser since they come together at the same time. But then the Gemara had a kasha. We see that Rabbi Yehuda holds ein naig b'shlil. We see from the beginning of the parak back on Pei Tesamid Beis that Rabbi Yehuda holds it's ein naig b'shlil, which the Gemara was machalik. It depends whether it's a kosher animal or not. It is naig b'shlil by a Behemoth Tahir, but not by a Behemoth Tamea. And now we're finally caught up, picking it up like a dozen lines from the bottom of Kuf Amid Beis. This premise that both the Gid Anasha and the Isser of Behemoth Tamea is happening at the same time. What's not in the Mishnah Masechta Nazir says, Al Elu Tumas an Nazir Megalech, for the following kinds of Tumah. A Nazir is Seiser's Naziris, has to shave his head and start his count of Naziris again. Al Hames, if he becomes into contact with a dead body. The Al Kezayis min Hames, and just a Kezayis worth of a mace, and that doesn't even make any sense. For Kashalan, Al Kezayis min Hames Megalech, if you're telling me these Megalech for a Kezayis mace, Al Hames Kula Lekol Shekain, for sure for a whole dead body, so why do you have to list me both halachas? So if Yomer Rav Yechanan said to that, when we talk about the whole mace, we're not talking about an adult corpse. We're talking about a nefel, which was not developed, that even though it's not a kezayis, and it's this itty-bitty little nefel, but since it's a complete mace, it will be metama Thomas mace. But what do you see from Rabbi Yechanan? That the Evare nefel developed before the rest of its body, including the Gid Anasha, Alma Isser Tuma Kodim. So don't talk to me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, they're happening at the same time. They're two different times. So the Gemara, Afal Gav the Isser Tuma Kodim, you're right, the Isser Tuma is going to happen before the Gid Anasha, before the Gid Anasha is formed, but yet still, I'll see Isser Gid Chayil Alei. Why? Because Shekeni Sur Naig Bebnei Nayach. There's a special chumrah of the Gid Anasha that's more chumrah because it applies Kaida Matan Torah to the Bnei Nayach, because it was usher to the Bnei Yaakov. Umemela, even though we typically would say Ein Isser Chal Al Isser, here because of the chumrah it will be Chal. Deika Nami Diktani, that this is the Pshat in Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda Halei Bnei Yaakov Ne'asar Gid Anasha V'adayin Behemoth Tamei Muteres Lahem. So the way we're understanding this is that even according to the Tanna Kama, there would be an Isser Gid Anasha, but practically speaking it can't because it's already been Usher and Ein Isser Chal Al Isser. And that means that also the Tanna Kama is acknowledging that the Gidin are nice and tam, therefore it is a din of Basar. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Gid Anasha could be Chal on the pre-existing Isser of Behemoth Tamea because it's more Chomer since it was Negeh to the Bnei Nayach. And this is Meduik in what Rabbi Yehuda says by saying that the Isser was on the Bnei Yaakov as opposed to saying that it was only when not kosher animals were mutter. Rabbi Yehuda's point is that it's not only that the Gid Anasha is Chal on not kosher animals, but to say that it's Chal on the Bnei Nayach. That's the Nakuda. Gufa. Getting back into the Machlekes that we started talking about right after the Mishnah. Ha'oichel Gid Anasha shel Behemoth Tamea, Rabbi Yehuda is Mechayiv Shtayim. You get two sets of malchus, one because you ate not kosher meat, and one because you ate a Gid Anasha. Moving over to Tamid Aleph. For Rabbi Shimon is Pater, which sounds like he's Pater in Gansen, for not eating kosher animals and for not eating a Gid Anasha. Frek the Gemara of Rabbi Shimon, what are we talking about? Manavshach. I Isser Chal Al Isser, then Lechayiv Nami Mishum Gid, you should be Chayiv for both. And I Ein Isser Chal Al Isser, and if you're telling me Ein Isser Chal Al Isser, so Lechayiv Mishum Tumah Dekodim, Chotch, you should be Chayiv for eating not kosher meat, which came first. And if you're going to say I Ein Begidin Ben Nice and Tam Lechayiv Mishum Gid, and if you're going to tell me that Gid Anasha is not nice and tam, and therefore it's not usher, it's not kosher kosher meat. And therefore, there is no pre-existing isser of isser behema tameya on the gid hanasha, and therefore the gid hanasha should be chayiv, because there's no ein isser chal isser problem. So according to Reb Shimon, manavshach, why would you be off scot-free and not be over any surim at all? The Gemara Amar Rava, li'olam kasavar ein begidin b'nai sein tam, and therefore it's not meat, and therefore there is no pre-existing isser, therefore there is no ein isser chal isser. The shani also, but still the gid hanasha is not going to be chal. Why? The Amar Kra, al kain lo yoichlu b'nei Yisrael as gid hanasha. Don't eat it. So misha gidei usser ubsarei mutter. So we're only saying that kind of an animal, that gid is usser, but the basar is mutter. So yatzazu shegidei usser ubsarei usser. So we're being mamayit the non-kosher animal that the gid would be usser had the isser been shaykh to be applying, and the basar would also be usser. And therefore the isser gid hanasha is not negid to a not kosher animal, whether or not the gid was already usser as not kosher basar. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, ha'oichel gid hanasha shel nevela. Let's say someone eats a gid hanasha of a regular kosher nevela. Rabbi Meir mechayiv shtayim, one for the gid hanasha, one for eating nevela. The chachamim ma'imrim ein chayiv ela achas, just for eating the gid hanasha, because according to the chachamim, the gid hanasha is noisein tam, and therefore it's bechlal already the animal's basar. But it's not going to be chayiv for nevela, and therefore when the animal drops dead and becomes a nevela, that nevela isser is not chal on the gid hanasha. And Rashi points out that according to Shitas Rabbanan, even when that second isser is more inclusive than the first one, we will still say ein isser chal al isser, and that's why you're in a chayiv ela achas. Umaydim chachamim l'Rabbi Meir, baichel gid hanasha shel oila v'shel shar haniskel. If you did gid hanasha of a carbon oila, where he's eating the gid hanasha of something that became an oila or a shar haniskel, shechayiv shtayim, you're going to be chayiv two sets of malchus, one because of the gid hanasha, but also one because of this miyaz usher to eat, since it's for an oila or a shar haniskel. Now, man hai tana, who is this tana that we want to apply the shitas chachamim to be isser kailel, isser chal al isser lesle, when you have an inclusive isser? You don't say isser chal al isser, but isser kailel be isser chamer. In a case of where it's an isser kailel, it's also an isser chamer. Isla, you will hold that the second isser will be chal, because both by the oila and by the shar niskel, it's a more expansive isser. It's the whole animal, not just the gid hanasha. It's also usser b'hana. So that new isser kailel, which is more chamer, will also be chayev back on the gid. Omar Rava, who is that? It's Rabbi Yossi Glili. He did tnan, as the Mishnah in Zvachim says, Tamei she'achol kodesh, bein kodesh tamei, bein kodesh tahar. If a tamei person eats kachim, which the kachim itself is tamei, or the kachim itself is tahar, but he's tamei, he will be chayev. He'll be mechuyev to bring a carbon if he did it b'shegeg. For example, he didn't know that he was tamei, then he has to bring a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yossi Glili Omer, tamei she'achol as tahar is chayev. If he eats kachim that's tahar, he's chayev, but tamei she'achol as tamei is pater. If he himself is tamei and he ate kachim that's tamei, he'll be pater shelo yachol ela davar tamei. He'll only be chayev because he ate something that's tamei, which we think Rabbi Yossi Glili means to say that a tamei person can't eat kachim. But if the food was already tamei from before, he's not mechuyev to eat it because it's already been neschala. Omrulei, the chachamim said, af tamei she'achol as tahar, even if a tamei person ate tahar dika food, kivin shenaga by tamahu, once he touched it before he ate it, he's going to make it tamei. But in that case, you're asking that the Torah is mechayev him to bring a carbon chatas for eating kachim when he himself is tamei. And if that's the case, he should be chayev even where he ate kachim that was tamei before he touched it. Because what difference does it make whether or not the food became tamei as a result of him picking it up to eat it, or because somehow it became tamei beforehand? Either way, he ate food that was already tamei. To which the Gemara says, Shaper ko amri le rabbanan l'Rabbi Yossi haglili. What's Rabbi Yossi haglili going to say back? Yamar Rava, and you may remember this from Zvachim Daf Kuf Ches. Benit mahaguf yachar kach nitma basar. When he became tamei first, and then the basar became tamei afterwards. Kuli amalei pligi dechayev. Then he has to certainly bring a carbon chatas for eating that basar, because even though it already was tamei, the isser kares kadim. What came first in isser kares, which is the einish for eating when you're eating kachim when the person is tamei, but when you're eating kachim that the thing you're eating is tamei, that's only in isser malchus. So in that case, kuli amalei pligi dechayev. But ki pligi, when is there going to be a machlekes? That's benitma basar. When the first thing is the fact that the meat itself became tamei, not that the person, but the meat. In which case, then the isser malchus is being applied first before the isser kares. So now the second isser is being more kailul than the first one in the fact that it answers all different kachim to this person, even that which was previously tar. So Rabbanan islahu isser kailul. So there is more isser in the world here. It's kailul more. But basically, less isser kailul. Why? We don't say such a migu. Basically, argues with the migu of that second isser that makes him chayav for eating the tar kachim, because we're basically arguing with the chum shita that migu that the later isser kailul is making him chayav for eating the tar pieces. It should also make him chayav for eating this tamei piece. So what do you see from all this? Or basically holds the idea of ein isser chal isser, even if that second isser is more inclusive and it's an isser kailul, and therefore the chachamim who argue must be Yishitas Rabbi Yossi Glili. Frag the Gemara. For Rabbi Yossi Glili, it's still shver. Nihid de isser kal less le isser kal. But let's say the second one is more chomer. But yavo yisser chomer yachol al isser kal. Umay ninhu, and what's that going to be? That's going to be tumas haguf. Shari tumas haguf is bekares, whereas the previous isser of eating basar that's tamei is only going to be malchus. Amar Ravashi man lemula and the tumas haguf chamura. You're making a big assumption here that tumas haguf is going to be more chomer because of the kares. Dilma tuma basar chamura to less like tara b'mikvah. This is a very interesting idea the Gemara is saying. Hey, yes, that an einish is worse for the person being tamei, but that doesn't doesn't necessarily be the only criteria for determining what's considered a chumrah. Maybe the fact that there's never going to be a tahara for food, because food can never become tahar, unless it's water that hashaka can be matahar. But a regular piece of basar, once it becomes tamei, it's tamei forever. A person, however, hayos the einish might be worse for a tameidik person, but the person can fix himself. He can go to the mikveh. But the food is less like tahara than mikveh, and maybe that's why it's more chomer, turning over tamid beis. For Rabbi Yosei Glili, less leiser kailul. This idea that Rabbi Yosei Glili doesn't hold of iser kailul. I'll show you a brisa fakert. Shabbos v'yom kippurim. Let's say you have a day that's both Shabbos and Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur fell out on Shabbos. Shogag v'osa malacha. So what's going to be with this guy? Minayin shechayev al zeh ba'atzmai v'al zeh ba'atzmai. How do you know that he's chayev for each one? One carbon chatas for Shabbos and another carbon chatas for Yom Kippur. Talmud Leimer Shabbos and Yom Kippurim hu. It's two different makayros. Divrei Rabbi Yosei Haglili, but Rabbi Akiva Omer ein chayev ala achas. You're only chayev one carbon chatas because ein iser chal iser. But what do you see from Rabbi Yosei Haglili? The fact that you're chayev both, clearly you do say iser chal iser when one is an iser kail. And since Shabbos is being meisif more isurim than on Yom Kippur, because for Yom Kippur you're chayev kares, but now when Shabbos comes you're going to also get misas bezdin. And Yom Kippur klape Shabbos is an iser kail. The Shabbos is asur b'malacha mutar b'achila. And Rashi goes through to show you how Yom Kippur is also an iser kail on Shabbos because of the iser to eat. But kum techayis, according to Rabbi Yosei Haglili, you do say the iser chalal iser when it's the iser kail iser meisif. So and for the Gemara, sholach Ravin mishum Rabbi Yosei Rabbi Chanina kachatzal shel Mishnah. This is actually the way the Mishnah was learned, but the lashon is messed up. The epoch you should switch it around. And in Echanami, it's Rabbi Akiva who holds your chayiv two chatais, where Rabbi Yosei Haglili holds your chayiv one. Sholach Rav Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Giyuri mishum de Rabbi Yochanan. The divir Rabbi Yosei Haglili mai de afchan. According to Rabbi Yosei Haglili, that it was switched around, meaning you're only chayiv one carbon chatas. Shogag b'Shabbos v'hezed b'Yom Kippurim. Let's say he did a shogeg klape Shabbos, and he was mazed klape Yom Kippur. And the way Rashi says the example that he knew it was Yom Kippur, he just forgot it was Shabbos. He'll be chayiv for being machal Shabbos. Hezed b'Shabbos v'shogag b'Yom Kippurim, and the way around, he'll be putter, no carbon chatas at all. And because the understanding is that Shabbos was chal, but Yom Kippur was not. Because the Isser of Shabbos was chal, but the Isser of Yom Kippurim was not. And therefore you're not mechuyev to bring a carbon chatas unless Shabbos was neschalal b'shoigeg. And my timer, what's the reason that you have a chi of Shabbos as opposed to Yom Kippur? Because I'm Rabbiya, Shabbos kavi b'kaima. Every single date of Shabbos is already pre-established from Sheshis Mei Bereshis, right? Every day that follows Friday is going to be a Shabbos. But Yom Kippurim is beidina de kakavila. But Yom Kippur can depend. It depends on Bezin when they are makadosh the chodesh and say when it should happen. And therefore we always look at the Isser of Shabbos to have been chal first, and therefore it's like a pre-existing Isser, and therefore it prevents the Yom Kippurim Isser from being chal. Omrle Rava, Seif Tarvau Bahari Adalikasu, Lamaisa, they both came at the same time. Once the night falls on Friday night, it starts being Shabbos and Yom Kippur at the same time, in which case, why, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the guy who was over there is only bringing a carbon chatas for Shabbos? Elam Rava, Shmada Have. It was a time of Shmad, where the Yidden were not allowed to observe Yom Kippur. The Sholchem Itam, and therefore Chazal said, the Yumid de Kippuri de Hoshata, Shabsahi, that they should make the Yom Kippur that year on Shabbos. In other words, this was a very unique story, that because of that Shas HaShmad, they didn't want Yom Kippur to be forgotten, and therefore they told everyone to be Noig Yom Kippur on that year on Shabbos, even though it really wasn't Yom Kippur. And therefore the Goyim wouldn't chap that they were observing Yom Kippur, because, alright, they're not working today, they just assumed it's Shabbos. Of course, since this is Shas HaShmad, we have to understand why everything is not Yoharg Val Yaver because of Shas HaShmad. Why were the Yidden not mechuyev to defy the Shas HaShmad? And the Ritva asks that for Akasha. And the Gemara just ends off, V'chein ki also Ravin v'chol nechusei. Also when Ravin came, and all that came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amrua Karava, they said like Rava, that was what happened over there. And we'll pick it up with the two dots in Mirza Hashem from Monday's daf.